I found them in the supply room planning their future. Once the life insurance comes through, we can disappear together. Sarah Miller was dying in room 312, while her husband and her nurse plotted to collect $500,000 from her death. When the doctor offered a life-saving treatment, David's refusal wasn't about mercy, it was about money. My name is Denise Carter, and I've been a cancer ward nurse for 16 years at Mercy General Hospital. In that time, I've watched families make impossible decisions about experimental treatments, risk versus hope, and quality of life versus quantity of time. I thought I understood the agonizing choices that come with terminal illness. I was wrong. What I discovered about David Miller and Rebecca Walsh wasn't about difficult medical decisions or compassionate end-of-life care. It was about cold-blooded murder disguised as loving protection. And it taught me that sometimes the greatest danger to a patient comes from the people who claim to love them most. This is the story of how I exposed a conspiracy to commit murder for life insurance money, and how I fought to save a woman's life when the two people closest to her were actively trying to end it. Sarah Miller was 33 years old when she received the diagnosis that would change everything: stage 4 pancreatic cancer with metastases to her liver and lungs. The oncologist's prognosis was devastating: 6 to 8 months, possibly less with aggressive disease progression. But Sarah was a fighter. Despite the grim outlook, she approached her treatment with determination and hope that impressed everyone who met her. She researched her condition extensively, asked detailed questions about every medication, and maintained a positive attitude that inspired other patients on our ward. "I know the statistics aren't good," she told me during one of our early conversations, "but I also know that someone has to be in that small percentage who beats this. Why not me?" Sarah had everything to live for. She and her husband David had been married for 8 years and were trying to start a family when her cancer was discovered. She was a successful marketing manager who loved her work, and she had close relationships with her parents and sister who lived nearby. David Miller appeared to be the perfect supportive husband during those first few weeks. He attended every doctor's appointment, took detailed notes about Sarah's treatment plan, and seemed genuinely devoted to helping her fight the disease. "David's been amazing through all this," Sarah told me repeatedly. "I don't know what I'd do without him. He's put his whole life on hold to take care of me." Sarah's treatment plan included aggressive chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and experimental immunotherapy drugs that offered some hope of slowing the cancer's progression. The side effects were brutal, but Sarah endured them with remarkable grace. "Every day I'm still here is a victory," she said during a particularly difficult week of treatment, "and every day gives the doctors more time to find something that might work." Rebecca Walsh joined Sarah's care team during her second month of treatment. Rebecca was an experienced oncology nurse who'd recently transferred to our unit from another hospital. She was professional, knowledgeable, and seemed to have a genuine rapport with both Sarah and David. At first, I was pleased to have Rebecca's help with Sarah's care. Sarah required intensive monitoring and support, and having another experienced nurse on her team improved the quality of her care significantly. I had no idea that Rebecca's interest in Sarah's case had nothing to do with providing excellent nursing care. The first sign that something was wrong came during Sarah's third month of treatment, when I overheard a conversation between David and Rebecca that had nothing to do with medical care. I was restocking supplies in the room next to the family consultation area when I heard David's voice through the thin wall. I checked with the insurance company again. The policy is definitely $500,000, and there's no waiting period since it was purchased more than 2 years ago. "Are you sure there won't be any problems collecting?" Rebecca's voice was clearly audible. As long as her death appears natural and treatment-related, there shouldn't be any investigation. Cancer patients die all the time from treatment complications. I froze, realizing that I was overhearing something that had nothing to do with supporting Sarah through her illness. "How much longer do you think it will be?" Rebecca asked. "The doctor said maybe 3 to 4 months if the current treatment stops working, but there are ways to accelerate the process if necessary." My blood ran cold as I understood what they were discussing. David wasn't talking about Sarah's medical care. He was talking about her life insurance policy and how to collect it as quickly as possible. "We'll need to be careful about the timing," Rebecca continued. "If we're too obvious about being together right after she dies, people might ask questions." "I know, but once the insurance money comes through, we can disappear together, start fresh somewhere new." I quietly moved away from the wall, my hands shaking as I processed what I'd heard. David and Rebecca weren't just having an affair, they were actively planning Sarah's death for financial gain. Once I knew what to look for, I began noticing disturbing patterns in David and Rebecca's behavior around Sarah's care. David had become increasingly vocal about the burden of Sarah's treatment and the futility of aggressive care. During family meetings with doctors, he consistently pushed for less aggressive treatment options, claiming he wanted to spare Sarah unnecessary suffering. Rebecca, meanwhile, was subtly undermining Sarah's confidence in her treatment. She would mention side effects and complications in ways that made Sarah more fearful and less likely to pursue aggressive therapies. "You know, Sarah," I overheard Rebecca saying during one medication administration, "some patients find that the treatment becomes worse than the disease. It's okay to consider comfort care instead of fighting so hard." "But I'm not ready to give up yet," Sarah replied. "I still feel like there are options we haven't tried." "Of course, it's your choice. I just hate to see you suffering when there might be easier ways to spend your remaining time." Rebecca was systematically eroding Sarah's fighting spirit while positioning herself as a compassionate advocate for merciful end-of-life care. David's sabotage was more direct. He began forgetting to bring Sarah her prescribed medications from home, causing gaps in her treatment that could affect her progress. He discouraged her from researching new treatment options, claiming it was false hope that would only lead to disappointment. Most concerning was how David began influencing Sarah's interactions with her medical team. He would interrupt her questions during doctor visits, answer for her when physicians asked about her symptoms, and generally position himself as the decision-maker for her care. "Sarah gets confused by all the medical terminology," he would tell doctors. "It's easier if you just explain things to me and I'll help her understand." Sarah, weakened by treatment and trusting her husband completely, gradually began deferring to David's judgment about her medical care. The breakthrough that exposed David and Rebecca's true intentions came during Sarah's 4th month of treatment, when Dr. Martinez, her oncologist, received approval for an experimental drug that showed promising results for pancreatic cancer patients. "Sarah, I have some potentially exciting news," Dr. Martinez announced during their weekly consultation. "There's a new immunotherapy drug called PDX-101 that's shown remarkable results in clinical trials. In patients with your specific cancer markers, we're seeing response rates of up to 45%. Sarah's eyes lit up with hope for the first time in weeks. 45%? That's much better odds than anything we've tried so far. The catch is that it's still experimental, and there are some significant risks. About 15% of patients experience severe immune reactions that can be life-threatening, and because it's so new, insurance doesn't cover the cost, about $25,000 per month. David immediately interjected. Doctor, Sarah's been through so much already. Is it really worth putting her through more experimental treatments with such serious risks? That's for Sarah to decide, Doctor, Martinez replied firmly. Sarah, what are your thoughts? Before Sarah could answer, David continued. She's already suffering from the current treatments. Adding more risk doesn't seem like the compassionate choice. David, let me think about this, Sarah said, but her voice lacked the determination it had carried in earlier months. The other consideration, Dr. Martinez added, is that we need to start treatment within the next 2 weeks if we're going to try it. Sarah's condition has stabilized enough to make her a good candidate, but that window won't stay open indefinitely. Can we have some time to discuss this privately? David asked. Of course, but I'll need a decision by Monday if we're going to move forward. That evening, I deliberately positioned myself where I could observe David and Rebecca's conversation about the experimental treatment. What I heard confirmed my worst fears about their intentions. This could ruin everything, David said as they met in the hospital chapel, a location they'd chosen because it was usually empty during evening hours. What do you mean? Rebecca asked. If this new drug works, Sarah could live for years. And if it doesn't work, but the side effects kill her quickly, it might look suspicious. But the doctor said there's only a 45% chance it will work. That's still too high. We've been waiting for 4 months for this to be over. I can't keep pretending to be the devoted husband much longer. Rebecca moved closer to David. What if we convince her not to try the treatment? Tell her it's too risky. I've been trying, but she's starting to get suspicious about why I'm always pushing for less aggressive treatment. She asked me yesterday if I'm giving up on her. We need to be more subtle. What if I talk to her as her nurse? I could explain the risks in a way that makes her too scared to try it. Do you think that would work? Trust me, I know how to make medical treatments sound scarier than they really are. By the time I'm done talking to her, she'll be begging to avoid the experimental drug. I realized that David and Rebecca were planning to manipulate Sarah into refusing potentially life-saving treatment so they could collect her life insurance money faster. The next morning, I watched Rebecca implement her plan to convince Sarah to refuse the experimental treatment. Sarah, I wanted to talk to you privately about this new drug Dr. Martinez mentioned, Rebecca said as she checked Sarah's vital signs. What do you think about it? The 45% response rate sounds promising. Well, as your nurse, I've seen a lot of patients try experimental treatments. The thing is, the 15% who have severe reactions don't just get a little sick, they often die in very painful ways. Sarah's expression grew concerned. Dr. Martinez mentioned immune reactions, but he didn't make them sound that severe. Doctors sometimes downplay the risks because they're focused on the potential benefits. But I've seen patients whose immune systems basically attack their own organs. It's not a peaceful way to die. What about the 45% who respond well? Even when experimental drugs work initially, they often stop working after a few months. Then you're back where you started, but you've put your body through additional trauma. Rebecca was systematically undermining every positive aspect of the treatment while exaggerating the risks. And honestly, Sarah, I've watched your husband suffer through every step of your treatment. He loves you so much, but I can see how exhausted he is. Sometimes the most loving thing is to accept that you've fought as hard as you can. You think I should refuse the treatment? I think you should consider whether putting yourself and David through more experimental procedures is really what's best for both of you. You've been so brave, but sometimes bravery means knowing when to stop fighting. I watched Sarah's resolve crumble as Rebecca painted the experimental treatment as selfish and potentially torturous. I knew I had to gather concrete evidence of David and Rebecca's conspiracy before I could report them to authorities. Their conversations could be dismissed as inappropriate, but not necessarily criminal, unless I could prove they were actively working to cause Sarah's death. I began documenting their meetings, their conversations about the insurance money, and their efforts to manipulate Sarah's medical decisions. I also researched the experimental drug that Dr. Martinez had recommended to understand whether Rebecca's description of the risks was accurate. What I found was that Rebecca had grossly exaggerated the dangers of PDX 101 while completely misrepresenting the potential benefits. The drug had actually shown remarkable success in clinical trials, with response rates even higher than Dr. Martinez had mentioned for patients with Sarah's specific cancer markers. More importantly, I discovered that David had been researching how quickly life insurance claims could be processed and what conditions might trigger investigations into suspicious deaths. I also found evidence that Rebecca had been influencing other aspects of Sarah's care in ways that could shorten her life. She had been forgetting to administer certain supportive medications, providing inaccurate information about side effect management, and discouraging Sarah from reporting symptoms that could lead to helpful interventions. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed to catch them in the act of deliberately sabotaging Sarah's care. I decided to use my phone to record David and Rebecca's conversations, hoping to capture evidence of their criminal conspiracy. The opportunity came when they met in the supply room to discuss their final plans for convincing Sarah to refuse the experimental treatment. "She's wavering," Rebecca reported. "I think one more conversation about the risks will convince her to refuse the treatment." "Good. How long after she refuses do you think it will be?" "If we can get her to stop the immunotherapy too, probably 6 to 8 weeks, maybe less if we're lucky." "And you're sure there won't be any questions about her rapid decline?" "Pancreatic cancer patients deteriorate quickly when treatment stops working. No one will be surprised if she goes downhill fast once she refuses the experimental drug." "What about after she dies? How long do we need to wait before we can be together openly?" "I think 6 months is safe. We should probably act like we're supporting each other through grief. It will look natural." They were discussing Sarah's death with the casual tone of people planning a vacation. "Have you thought about where you want to go once the insurance money comes through?" Rebecca asked. "I was thinking somewhere tropical, maybe Costa Rica or Thailand, somewhere we can live well on $500,000 for a long time." The recording captured not only their plan to manipulate Sarah into refusing treatment, but also their detailed plans for enjoying the proceeds of her death. Armed with recordings of David and Rebecca's conspiracy, I faced a critical decision about how to protect Sarah while ensuring that justice was served. I decided to approach Dr. Martinez directly with the evidence I'd gathered. As Sarah's oncologist, he had the authority to override family objections to treatment if he believed they weren't in the patient's best interest. "Dr. Martinez, I need to show you something that concerns Sarah Miller's care," I said, requesting a private meeting in his office. I played the recordings of David and Rebecca discussing their plans to collect Sarah's life insurance money and manipulate her into refusing treatment. Dr. Martinez's expression grew increasingly horrified as he listened to the evidence. "This is attempted murder," he said when the recording ended. "They're actively working to cause Sarah's death for financial gain. What can we do to protect her?" "First, we need to get law enforcement involved immediately. Second, I need to have a conversation with Sarah about the experimental treatment without David present." Dr. Martinez contacted hospital administration and local police while I arranged to speak with Sarah privately during one of David's absences. When I told Sarah about David and Rebecca's conspiracy, her reaction was a mixture of shock, betrayal, and surprisingly, relief. I knew something was wrong. she said, after listening to the recordings. David has been so eager for me to give up treatment, and Rebecca kept making everything sound hopeless. I started to think I was being paranoid. You weren't paranoid. They've been systematically manipulating your medical decisions to shorten your life. What about the experimental drug? Was Rebecca lying about the risks? She was exaggerating the dangers and hiding the potential benefits. Dr. Martinez says you're an excellent candidate, and the success rates are even higher than he initially mentioned. Sarah made the decision to pursue the experimental treatment immediately, despite David's objections. When David discovered that Sarah had decided to try PDX 101, his mask finally slipped completely. "Sarah, you're making a huge mistake. This drug could kill you." "No, David. You and Rebecca were planning to kill me. The drug might save my life." The police arrested David and Rebecca that evening on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. The evidence from my recordings, combined with their documented efforts to manipulate Sarah's medical care, provided a compelling case for attempted murder. 6 months later, Sarah Miller was in complete remission from her cancer. The experimental drug had worked even better than Dr. Martinez had hoped, and Sarah's response had been so dramatic that she was now participating in expanded clinical trials to help other patients. David Miller was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Rebecca Walsh lost her nursing license and received a 10-year sentence for her role in the conspiracy. Sarah's life insurance policy was cancelled due to the investigation, but she no longer needed it. She had divorced David, returned to work, and was building a new life free from the people who had tried to kill her for money. "You saved my life in more ways than one," Sarah told me during a recent follow-up visit. "Not just by exposing David and Rebecca, but by helping me fight for treatment that actually worked." For me, Sarah's case reinforced the importance of advocating for patients, even when that advocacy means challenging family members and colleagues. The experimental treatment that David and Rebecca tried to prevent Sarah from receiving had given her back her life. Sometimes the most important nursing skill isn't administering medication or monitoring vital signs. Sometimes it's recognizing when the people closest to a patient are actually their greatest threat, and having the courage to intervene when lives hang in the balance, because patients trust us to protect them from all harm, including harm from the people who claim to love them most. Sarah Miller trusted her husband and her nurse with her life, and they tried to trade that life for money, but they underestimated the power of one nurse who refused to let a patient die for someone else's financial gain. The experimental drug saved Sarah's life, but justice saved her dignity. And sometimes that makes all the difference.